Racist cop arrests black father in front of his crying kids, then learns he's a civil rights lawyer fighting for justice. The sweltering summer heat in Maplewood felt oppressive, the kind that made the air thick and unbearable. Officer Dan Harmon, a burly man in his mid-40s, with a face hardened by years of routine patrols, was already on edge. Today there had been a string of minor complaints, and his mood was sour. As he cruised down Elm Street, his eyes caught sight of a sedan awkwardly parked on the curb. The car had a Family Fun Day sticker on the back, but Harmon's gaze narrowed on its poor parking job. His irritation flared. He'd seen this kind of carelessness too many times today. Inside the car, Marcus Johnson, a tall black man in a sharp suit, sat in the driver's seat, trying to calm his two children in the back. Their tear-streaked faces mirrored his own frustration. The family outing had already hit a snag, and now this. Harmon stepped out of his patrol car, walking towards the sedan with heavy, purposeful strides. He rapped on the window, and Marcus, eyes tired, rolled it down. "Everything all right here?" Harmon's tone was clipped, his words more a command than a question. Marcus forced a strained smile. "Officer, we're just trying to get to a family event. It's been a long day for the kids. Can we move this along?" Harmon's eyes darted over Marcus, then to his kids, his expression hardening. "Step out of the vehicle." Marcus's stomach sank. He glanced back at his children, crying, scared. "Officer, I'm just parked a little off. Can't we sort this out without causing more trouble?" Harmon's face didn't budge. "Step out." Marcus exhaled slowly, then unbuckled his seatbelt and stepped out, careful to keep calm for his children's sake. Harmon's stance was rigid, his gaze cold and calculating. "What's the problem?" Marcus asked, his voice steady, but with an edge of weariness. "You're parked improperly. That's a citation." Harmon's words were blunt, his eyes narrowing. "You people never seem to get it." Marcus's patience wavered. "I'm willing to move the car, but this feels unnecessary. I'm trying to get my kids somewhere." Harmon's smirk deepened. "You people always have an excuse." Marcus clenched his fists. His kids' sobs grew louder in the backseat. "Officer, can't you show some discretion? My kids are scared. This isn't right." Harmon's eyes flicked to the children, then back to Marcus, unmoved. "This isn't about being right. It's about following the law." Marcus stared at him, a knot of anger forming in his chest. "No, this is about power. You're doing this because you can, not because it's right." Harmon's face reddened. "You don't know a thing about what I deal with. I'm doing my job." "If this was about your job, you'd be showing some empathy. Instead, you're just trying to make this worse." Marcus snapped, the frustration seeping into his voice. Harmon pulled out his ticket pad, scribbling furiously. "Take it or leave it." Marcus watched him, fists clenched tight, as Harmon handed over the citation. The air was thick with tension, the heat pressing down on them. Marcus looked back at his children, their small faces still wet with tears, then back at Harmon, his expression cold and indifferent. As Marcus climbed back into the car, he caught sight of Harmon standing by the curb, rigid and unyielding. The ticket was just paper, but the weight of the encounter felt heavy. Marcus drove off, his heart heavy, his kids still sniffling in the backseat. This wasn't just about parking. It was about something deeper, something that sat at the core of every unfair interaction like this. The day had simmered, but Marcus knew one thing: this fight wasn't just his. It was a reminder of the broader struggle, one that demanded more than silence. The day had dragged on for Marcus Johnson, but the weight of what happened earlier still clung to him like a shadow. At the family gathering, the vibrant sounds of kids playing and the smell of barbecued food should have been enough to shake off the tension, but it wasn't. His mind kept drifting back to the confrontation with Officer Harmon, replaying the scene over and over. As Marcus sat on the edge of the picnic table, watching his children laugh and chase after their cousins, his hands fidgeted with his phone. The screen lit up with messages, but his eyes remained distant, locked on the horizon. His jaw clenched slightly, and his fingers tightened around the phone, the faint tremble of anger just beneath the surface. His phone buzzed. Sarah Patel, a civil rights attorney he had worked with before, was calling. Her voice carried urgency, cutting straight to the point. "Marcus, this is more than just a parking ticket. We both know that. It's happening everywhere. And it's time we fight back." Marcus rubbed his temple, trying to push away the swirling thoughts. "I don't know, Sarah. I've got my kids to think about. This isn't just about me. It could get messy, and they're the ones who'll suffer." There was silence for a beat, and then Sarah's voice softened but remained firm. "I get it. Believe me, I do. But this isn't just about you either. It's bigger than that. You're in a position where your story could change things. And your kids, you're fighting for their future too. You're showing them what it means to stand up." Marcus exhaled slowly, his eyes now on his kids. They were carefree now, laughing as they dodged the spray from a nearby sprinkler. But what about tomorrow? Next week? What kind of world were they going to inherit? "I've been hearing about other incidents like this," Sarah continued. "Reports of unnecessary escalations, profiling. It's a pattern, Marcus. This could be a tipping point if we take action." "I hear you," he said, staring blankly as his phone screen dimmed and turned black. "But I don't want to turn this into a war." Sarah's tone shifted, more urgent now. "It's not a war. It's justice. You can't sit this one out." Marcus swallowed hard. The anger was still there, but now it was mingling with fear of what might come next. Was it worth risking his peace, his kids' peace, for something that might not even change? "Let's meet tomorrow," he finally said. "We'll figure out the next steps." After hanging up, Marcus sat in silence, the noise of the gathering around him fading into the background. His kids ran up to him, tugging at his shirt, excitedly telling him about their game. He forced a smile and hugged them close, feeling the weight of his decision settling in. The conversation with Sarah hadn't just planted the seed, it had watered something that had been growing inside him all day. The quiet rage, the determination, the need to do something. But there was also that nagging doubt. Could he afford to put his family through this? As the sun dipped below the trees, casting long shadows across the park, Marcus's sister Angela approached him. "You doing okay?" she asked, sitting beside him. Marcus sighed. "I don't know, Ang. It's just the way Harmon looked at me, the way he spoke to me like I was beneath him. It's not just the ticket, it's everything. And now Sarah's saying we need to take this up a notch." Angela nodded. "I heard about what happened, but she's right, Marcus. You've never backed down from a fight, and you've always stood up for what's right. But I get it, this isn't easy. I'm just tired of feeling like every move I make could be the wrong one," Marcus admitted, his voice low. "And now I've got to think about my kids. What if pushing back only makes things worse?" Angela placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've got to do what feels right for you. But remember, staying quiet hasn't made things better. Maybe this time, speaking up will." Marcus stared at the kids playing in the distance, the way their laughter filled the air with innocence. They didn't know the weight their father carried, and maybe they didn't need to. But one day, they'd understand what it meant to stand up for something. "I'll think about it," he said finally. The night settled over the park, the stars flickering faintly above. Marcus gathered his children and made the drive home, his mind still swirling with uncertainty. He tucked them into bed, their peaceful faces a stark contrast to the turmoil inside him. As he stood at the window later that night, staring into the quiet street, the weight of the day hit him all at once. The decision to fight wasn't just about one parking ticket or one cop. It was about changing the narrative, confronting the patterns that had woven themselves into the fabric of his life. He wasn't sure if he was ready for what came next, but one thing was clear. He couldn't sit on the sidelines anymore. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but Marcus knew he would face them head-on, for his kids, for his community, for himself. The morning light streamed through the blinds as Marcus sat at his cluttered desk, his mind racing. He glanced at a family photo on the edge of the desk, his children laughing, oblivious to the struggles their father now faced. He couldn't let them down. Not now, not ever. His phone buzzed, breaking his reverie. It was Sarah Patel. He answered quickly, eager to move forward. "Morning, Marcus," Sarah greeted him with a sense of urgency. "Ready for today?" "As ready as I'll ever be," he replied, tension lingering in his voice. They arranged to meet at their usual cafe. Just before he left, Another call came in from James Carter, his colleague. "Marcus, I've heard some rumblings about Harmon. Word is, this guy's got a record, other incidents, similar behavior. This might be bigger than you think." "Yeah, Sarah mentioned something like that," Marcus muttered, gripping his phone tighter. "It's not just about me, is it?" "No, man. It's about all of us. We need to stay on top of this. I'm meeting Sarah now. I'll loop you in after." Walking to the cafe, Marcus felt the weight of the day pressing on him. As much as he wanted to protect his family, he knew stepping up was inevitable. Inside, Sarah was waiting with papers spread out on the table. She motioned for him to sit. "Okay, let's cut to the chase," Sarah began. "I've been digging into this, and it's clear this isn't just about a parking ticket or one bad cop. There's a pattern of profiling, and we're seeing it across the city." Marcus sighed, eyes fixed on the papers. "So, what's our move?" "We need to turn this into a formal case, compile testimonies, gather data, expose the pattern. It's not just about you. We can use this to push for real, systemic change." Marcus glanced out the window, watching people pass by, unaware of the battle he was about to wage. He took a deep breath. "Let's do it. I'm all in." Before they could dive deeper, Detective Sarah Mitchell walked in, spotting them immediately. She joined them with a determined look on her face. "I've got some news about Harmon," Mitchell said, sitting down. "He's got history. Internal records showed he's been under investigation before, but it's always been swept under the rug." Sarah leaned forward. "We could use that. If we get those records, it could break this case wide open." "I'll get them to you," Mitchell promised. "But we've got to be smart about this. If we expose too much too soon, they'll bury it before we can act." Marcus nodded. "We'll build a strong case, make it airtight." The weight of the task felt immense, but with Sarah's strategy and Mitchell's access to crucial information, they were forming a formidable team. They agreed to meet again soon, this time with hard evidence in hand. As Marcus left the cafe, the family photo from earlier flashed in his mind again. This fight wasn't just for him, it was for his children, for every person who'd been silenced by systems built to keep them down. He wasn't backing out now. This wasn't about a parking ticket anymore. It was about changing everything. The courtroom was still, the kind of silence that felt heavy, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Marcus Johnson sat at the plaintiff's table, his eyes focused on the jury box, but his thoughts were miles away. His fingers nervously squeezed the edges of his chair, the weight of this moment pressing down on him. Beside him, Sarah Patel shuffled through the final notes, her face calm, but Marcus could see the tension in her jaw. This was it. The city had been waiting for this day, and the room was packed. Journalists, community leaders, and ordinary citizens, all craning their necks for a glimpse of justice. Officer Harmon sat a few rows away, his face drawn, his expression unreadable. This wasn't just a trial about one man. It had become a reckoning for the entire city. As the judge called for closing statements, Marcus stood, his heart pounding. This was the moment he had been preparing for, the moment that could change everything. "Your Honor, members of the jury," Marcus began, his voice steady but filled with the weight of his words. "This case is about more than one man's actions. It's about a system that has failed us all. Officer Harmon's actions weren't an isolated event. They are part of a broader pattern: racial bias, unchecked power, and a culture of silence. Today, we ask you to hold this officer accountable, not just for what he did to my client, but for what he represents. Justice must start somewhere, and it starts here with you." He paused, his eyes scanning the room, landing briefly on his wife and kids sitting in the back. Their faces were tight with anxiety, but also with hope. He had to win this, not just for them, but for every family that had felt powerless in the face of the law. The jury was led out to deliberate, and the wait began. Hours passed like molasses, the tension in the air thickening with every tick of the clock. Marcus sat in the hallway, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, staring at the floor as if it held the answers. Sarah sat beside him, quiet but solid, a pillar of strength. His wife joined him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You've done everything you can," she whispered, her voice soothing. "Now we just wait." Marcus nodded but couldn't shake the nerves twisting in his stomach. He glanced at his kids, his daughter playing with her fingers, his son leaning against his mother. They were too young to fully understand what was happening, but they knew it was important. He couldn't let them down. When the jury finally returned, Marcus's breath caught in his throat. He stood, his legs suddenly feeling like lead as the foreman rose to speak. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath alongside him. On the charges of misconduct and racial profiling, we find the defendant guilty. For a moment, time froze. Then, like a dam breaking, a wave of relief swept over the room. The gallery erupted into murmurs of satisfaction, while Marcus closed his eyes, letting the weight of the words sink in. Guilty. The word rang in his ears like a victory bell. He turned to Sarah, who gave him a small but firm nod. They had done it. They had won. Outside the courthouse, the sun was dipping low, casting a warm, golden glow over the city skyline. Marcus stepped out onto the courthouse steps, his family at his side. As soon as his feet hit the pavement, a crowd of supporters erupted into cheers. Journalists pushed forward, microphones thrust in his direction, but Marcus was focused on one thing, his family. He turned to his wife, pulling her into a tight embrace. "We did it," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You did it," she corrected, smiling up at him with pride. Their kids hugged him too, their small arms wrapping around his waist. Marcus knelt down to their level, looking them in the eyes. "You know what this means, right?" he said softly. "It means people are starting to listen. This is for all of us." His son looked up at him, eyes wide. "Are we safe now?" Marcus smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "We're safer, but the fight isn't over. This is just one step. But today, we took a step towards something better." As Marcus and his family walked away, the crowd parted for them, some people reaching out to shake his hand, others simply clapping as he passed. It wasn't just a victory for Marcus, it was a victory for the whole community. But deep down, Marcus knew this was only the beginning. The battle for justice didn't end with one guilty verdict. It would continue, day after day, until the system was changed for good. The screen fades to a visual montage, a swirl of footage from protests across the city, people holding signs that read, "Justice for all" and "End racial profiling." Clips of Marcus speaking at rallies play alongside images of activists marching through the streets, demanding reform. The camera cuts to Marcus at a community meeting, addressing the crowd with passion. The system didn't break overnight, and it won't be fixed overnight either. But we're here to keep fighting, to keep pushing for the change we deserve. This isn't just about one case or one verdict. This is about all of us standing together. As his words hang in the air, the scene shifts to Marcus with his family sharing a quiet moment at home. His kids are playing in the background, their laughter a reminder of what he's fighting for. The image lingers on his face, tired but determined. His voice, now a voiceover, delivers the closing line. "The fight isn't over, but today we took a step, and we're not stopping until we get there." Today we took a significant step towards justice, but the journey continues. Change doesn't happen overnight, and it takes all of us working together to create a more just society. Here's how you can get involved. Support civil rights organizations. Organizations like the ACLU, NAACP, and the Southern Poverty Law Center are at the forefront of fighting for justice and equality. Visit their websites, donate, and see how you can contribute to their efforts. Stay informed. Knowledge is power. Educate yourself about the issues of racial injustice and systemic bias. Follow credible news sources and engage with content that promotes understanding and reform. Participate in local advocacy. Join community groups that focus on civil rights and social justice. Attend town hall meetings, participate in peaceful protests, and make your voice heard in local and national conversations. Contact your representatives. Advocate for legislative changes by reaching out to your elected officials. Urge them to support policies that promote transparency, accountability, and reform within our institutions. Use social media for good. Share information, support movements, and amplify the voices of those working for justice. Use hashtags like #JusticeForAll, #EndRacialBias, and #CivilRights to spread awareness and build momentum. Every action, big or small, contributes to a larger movement for change. Together, we can build a future where justice and equality are not just ideals, but realities for everyone.